All right, I'm Sensei Mish. Welcome to DojoChat. I have the honor of sitting down today with Steve Perry. He is an author, martial artist. Um, we were talking just before going live that he's kind of been, I guess you could say an influence, but he's been kind of a connecting thread in some of the things that I've done in my life. But the one thing that I first knew him for were I basically came across him with this book. It's a martial arts book. I think it was really because the character's name ended up being Penn, which is my middle name. And I thought that was kind of cool. And it was one of those things where I had all my friends at the time where, they were reading stories that had, multiple book series. It was multiple book series. And I was like, just wasn't into anything that they were doing. And so I was in a bookstore and I was like, oh, what's this? Oh, it's martial arts based. Okay, let me check that out. And I fell in love with it and found out that it was really book 0 of this amazing Matador trilogy. This is the first book. Pick it up where you can get it. And of course he writes for Star Wars and he's a martial artist. So I don't know, Steve, tell me since this is all based, really it's a martial arts podcast, but we can talk about anything. What got you interested into the martial arts initially?
Oh, fear of getting beaten up. When I was a kid, I was a shrimp. I didn't get my height until I was coming out of high school in my weight. So I was one of those little 5'2" guys that weighed about 100 pounds, and I didn't really get beaten up that much. It was one of those things. I was in a tough junior high school. And there were a lot of guys around, and I usually was able to hold my own okay, but I was worried about it. There were a lot of thugs running around. I was worried that I was going to get pummeled, and so the idea of living in fear just didn't do it for me. And so when the first karate school opened, never got the name, but it was probably Goju. The guy had come back from a tour in Okinawa. He had just gotten his first degree black belt, and after a couple of years, opened up a school, and so I signed up. And that's sort of where the journey began. I was 18. Summer, I think I turned 18. It was, angry white pajamas. And I sort of got into it. And wherever I would go, I would find a place. And back in those days, we're talking, some years ago, the 1960s, there weren't that many schools around. You could find a couple of places where they were available, and then you were sort of out of luck. I mean, in the city I grew up in, Baton Rouge, the judo was taught at the YMCA, and there was this one karate school, and there were a couple of boxing gyms, and that was it. So I just kind of, whatever came up, I would study what I could get my hands on, and then after a while, sort of drill down to something I would think would be more interesting.
So now you're studying what now? Salat?
Yeah, Salat. The full name is something sounds like you would get with peanut sauce in a restaurant. Pukulan Pijak Salat Surah Plink.
Okay.
Each word means something, and I could go through all of it, but basically it's Indonesian style. Mostly based on the blade, and what you can do with a knife, you can do barehanded. So my teacher is Mahaguru Stephen Plank, and we use the term guru in the definition of teacher. That's what it means in Indian and Indonesian. So yeah, I've been with him for 25 years.
Wow, that's a while.
Yeah.
So it's funny because we just before going on, I had mentioned that being a fan of your writing and actually knowing that you live locally, but not knowing how local you lived. I had started working with at the hospital and security a while ago, and there's this one gal that I worked with, and we started talking about martial arts and talking about writing, and I knew that you had done Salat because you had been posting it on your blog. And so I had mentioned, it's like, oh yeah, my favorite writer, Steve Perry, he does Salat. And she's like, oh, Steve, yeah, I trained with him. I was like, no, you don't. And it was so funny. So it's, she said, yeah, come, I guess I don't know how, behind the scenes it was, but she got permission for me to come up, and I got to come up and train for a day, and which I thought was very interesting, because I've always, I've done, karate and arnis and studied different things. So this was a little bit different. And, but I can't remember how many people were there, but I remember, you basically teaming up with me. You're like, oh, I always get the new guys.
Yeah.
And so whatever drill we were working on, I was just like, and I also remember distinctly, because your reaction was so funny. Musashi Flex had come out, I don't know, several years before. And I had, I'm one of those guys that I'll buy the book because I know I want to read it, but it's just finding the time to read it. And so Audible has been my friend. Mm-hmm. And of course Audible, I just started in Audible just a couple of years ago. So at the time I had not listened to it or read it. And I think I had read a little bit of it and I put it down and I hadn't gotten back to it. And I had mentioned that, and you're like, oh, thanks. And I was like, I didn't mean it as an insult. I was like, it's really good, but I just don't have time to actually sit down and read. But yeah, I thought that was pretty funny. So Salat, why did you choose Salat over? Why did that kind of speak to you?
Well, it's one of those odd things. I was a martial arts bum. I took whatever I could get where I could get it. So I studied half a dozen different arts, starting with Goju and Okinawa Te, a couple of varieties of Kung Fu, Tai Chi. I did some Kendo for a while. There was a Kendo teacher here locally. Whatever I could, Kaji Kimbo, whatever I could find that I could get to. And I went to, I have a friend, Stephen Barnes, who's a science fiction fantasy writer, who's also martial arts. And Barnes was living up here, and he said, I'm taking this art, you should come see this guy's teaching in his garage. I went, oh yeah, some guy teaching in his garage. How exciting that will be. And so I wasn't that interested in it. He had mentioned it to me a year or so before. There was a science fiction convention in Portland, and Barnes was teaching a Tai Chi class on Sunday mornings. Mm-hmm. That was one of his regular things. He would do, just a short Tai Chi thing for people. And so he said, I'm not going to teach the class. My instructor's coming to show the Salat stuff that we're studying. And you should drop by. I said, no, okay, sure. Well, I was at the convention, so Sunday morning I went in to see what was going on. And I just was frankly astounded at what I was watching, because I didn't have a close game. I had done a lot of arts, but almost all of them were long-range arts, kicking, punching, occasional elbow, but no grappling to speak of. We had done some stand-up jiu-jitsu. And so I kind of was watching this guy, and he was out there in a sarong, throwing people around and doing it in such a way that he could drink a cup of coffee and handle it with his other hand. And I was going, so I went out to volunteer to see what it felt like to be hands-on. And, I was flying around too. And so the guy came over and I said something to him about me. He said, well, I'm just another guy in a skirt. And so I thought, this really looks interesting, because I really didn't have that aspect of the arts down very well at all. I had some weapon stuff. I had, Okinawa Te is big on all traditional Okinawan weapons. So, sai and sticks and swords and stuff. And after watching this guy, I thought, I got to check this out. And I had, at that point, already written books that were set with the art that I had made up. And I've made up a number of those arts for different books. And this was covering things that I had made up, or I thought I had made up. I thought, well, okay, we'll go check this out. So I signed up for the next class and started going, and pretty much that's where I've been since. It's been 25, 26 years, and I'm still learning new stuff.
Yeah, that's so cool. Now, early before we went on, we had talked about a little bit about the 97 step, about how you were kind of making the stuff up. You had made a comment that you had, because the 90s, for those of you who don't know, the 97 steps is basically a martial art that is based on 97 steps and positions, and you have to jump and Read the book. It's great. You'll learn more. But you had made a comment about how you had put like foot positions on the floor. Did you actually do that to try and create it so you could write better for it, or?
I not all 97 steps. No, I had the idea that uh, there's some martial arts that are basically positional. If you get in the right place at the right time, you win the encounter.
Right.
It's a Stonewall Jackson. Get there first is with the mostest, and so position is critical, especially as you get older, because it's great when you're 20 years old and you're a jock and you can kick an apple off the top of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's head, and you got that flexibility. But as you age, some of the moves that you used when you were 20 are not as let's see, available to you is the term.
Right.
So I wanted to come up with an art where if you're in the right place, you win. And so the trick is getting in the right place. So yeah, I drew a couple of patterns on the floor and kind of tried to step, but it was pretty much beyond me past a certain point. People say, well, where can I learn this art? Well, I don't know. Let me know when you find it, because when I got into Salat, what I realized that they did that. They drew patterns on the floor. There are basic geometric shapes, you've seen that, squares, triangles, crosses,
right.
And then big patterns that are sort of blends of all of them. And then, so I started fooling with the idea. I had in my mind that it was a blend of things that were kind of gymnastics and grappling and boxing and, a Aikido and some weapon work. All that was just sort of blended into what I call the sum of it all, Sumito. So that's where the name came.
Cool. Okay, that's awesome. The siblings of the Shroud. I remember you had posted something, and it was totally, completely not what I was picturing.
Mm-hmm.
And the siblings are the ones that created the 97 steps, or they are the. Let's see, I can't remember who it in one book in Musashi Flex, you have the person who created it, but the siblings of the Shroud, that's the martial art of this group. Shoot, I had always kind of envisioned them with kind of almost Jedi-like robes with hoods, like actual, because you describe, they wear actual like hoods over, and then they've got the hood over that.
Right.
I remember you had posted a long time ago about it was basically a picture of a burqa, and you had kind of gotten an idea. Is that where you? How did you envision them?
Well, that was kind of what I had in mind. They were robes. It was the Jedi-like robe, but face was covered, and the actually you had degrees of face cover. You get small pieces and larger pieces, and eventually the full robe. So the idea was is someone that you couldn't see who they were at all.
Right.
And I mean that's their variations on the burqa, but that's kind of what was the genesis, because I was dealing with Middle Eastern tropes, the names of the characters, the sort of look that I wanted to get had a kind of vaguely Middle Eastern look to it, and so when I put these pieces together, that's what I was looking at. It was an order, a priestly order, but the idea was you didn't know who you were talking to because you literally couldn't see anything about them. They were completely covered. So.
We have, let's see. So Harvey Hondent, he was actually a guest on my show a couple of weeks ago, and he's a good friend of mine. Who is your favorite writer and biggest influence?
That's one of those things that's really hard to say because it's kind of like saying which is your favorite child. So many people are different things. A couple of people in martial arts field who weren't really martial artists, but who wrote pretty good martial arts stuff. As in the science fiction and fantasy field, and it's different from mysteries and mainstream and westerns and all the rest of them, was Harry Harrison. Harry Harrison was a British writer who wrote action adventure books, and one of the weapons that they used was a gun that was taped to the inside of your forearm and in a holster. And when you pointed your finger and crooked your finger, so you can see, the gun would mechanically shoot out of the holster into your hand, and it had no trigger guard. So you pointed finger and it went blam, and then it would retract when you were done shooting, which I thought was a fascinating toy. It was the Death World trilogy or the Death World trilogy. There was a series of books where people lived on this planet where the world just hated them. Every animal and creature on the planet was trying to kill them. You couldn't go anywhere without having to shoot something. And so that was kind of the genesis for the Spetsdot, which was the back of the hand dart gun that I came up with. My variation on it. Spetsdot is, I think, Swedish or I think it's Swedish for point death. That's literally what it means. Um, so yeah, Harry Harrison was a good one, but I read all the science fiction and fantasy people growing up. Asimov, Bradbury, Clark, Harlan Ellison, all of the people that were extant. I mean, I was old enough so that I could go to the drugstore and go into the paperback rack and buy all the science fiction every month because there weren't that many people making it to the paperback rack, and they only cost $0.25. And so, I had lots of writers like that. They're martial arts writers, people who specifically now write martial arts books. Those didn't really get popular until the late 1960s, early 1970s, and Kung Fu was I think the genesis, the TV series Kung Fu. Before that, it had been martial arts movies and books, but not many, and I probably read most of them. So.
Right on. When it comes to the Matador universe, Man Who Never Missed was the first novel that came out.
Yes.
Where did the genesis for that kind of come from? When did you? And I'm sure you've gotten, or maybe not, have asked this question before, but it was like, what kind of sparked that creation to start this universe?
A discussion over breakfast with my wife about violence.
Really?
I found myself, as a writer, defending the use of violence in the books. And she was saying, well, what about this and what about that? And I was going, no, you just don't understand. You have to have violence. People have to do this stuff. And I started thinking to myself, well, you don't necessarily have to kill people in order to beat them. And so there's two things going on. One was I wanted to come up with a martial art based bodyguard who was really good at what he did or she did. And then I wanted to do it in such a way that they weren't killing people. They weren't piling up bodies. And so I came up with the idea of the Spetsdot, which is a dart gun, and a paralytic dart that when it hit you, you were basically in tetany. You crunched up for 6 months. It took that long for it to get out of your system. And so you could knock people over and they were essentially useless to you, and you had to take care of them. So if you shoot somebody and they're dead, all they got to do is put them in a hole in the ground. If you shoot somebody and they're alive and they're going to get better, you have to take care of them for 6 months. And they got to go into a rehab ward someplace. So that takes a certain amount of your available technology and or resources to take care of all those people that are piled up. So that was the first part. Second part was I had grown up reading Doc Savage books. And Doc Savage, these were pulp books from the 1930s and 40s, and they made a bad movie out of it. But Doc Savage and his crew used mercy bullets, and that's essentially what they were. They were chemically chemical darts that would knock somebody out. And so we've always had some variation of the phaser on stun. And so I thought, well, there's two things you have going on. You have a martial arts group that resist evil. They don't kill people; they just put them out for a while. And so that's where The Man Who Never Missed came from. The idea was to create a legend of a guy who, once they took him down and they counted his ammo supplies, they realized that he never missed anybody. He only used one dart per person or whatever. And so, and of course he did miss people. I cheated, but the idea was, it's, and if you've read Dune, the classic setup in Dune is that the main character makes a legend of himself in order to further the revolution. Right. And so that was the idea behind this book, was that, okay, you had a guy who was so good he never missed. What does that tell you? What kind of people are we dealing with that they're that adept? And of course, that's sort of, once you do one book, then it leads to questions. Well, I introduced a bunch of characters in this book. Well, let's give them all their own book. So that's essentially how that series got rolling. And then it was like, well, what happened before that? We have to go back and cover the part where we have say the Zero book. They weren't written sequentially in that, I sort of picked up about, episode 4, but I went back and picked up, the settings. All right, so how did this come about, and then what happened after? Probably the last book in this series, which I'm working on now, and I've been working on for a fairly long time because it's a back burner book. That Ace Books publish these things, and then they ran out of steam. Usually after a book has been out for a while, a series gets to 10, 12 books, and they start saying, well, they're not selling as well, so let's just move on to something else. And so
Right.
I know that the next book in the series is going to be just straight to ebook. It's something I'll publish myself. And so I haven't been working really hard to get it done. And it's been years, but eventually there will be a book, and the working title of it is Churl, Churl, and it's going to deal with the children of the Matadors. So
yeah. Okay. Right on. Well, weren't you at one time? Wasn't there a plan for? I think you were just going to call it Siblings of the Shroud. I think that was one of the ideas. It was going to take place after Musashi Flex.
Yeah. There was a sequence in my mind that I was going to bridge between Musashi Flex, which is the first chronologically book in the series where the art was created, and then how it was developed by the priesthood. And I started looking at how much work it was going to be, and what the grand effect was, and thought I was more interested in the children and grandchildren.
Okay.
So I'm putting my energy there.
Right on.
Yeah, the other one is Mew. I have to point this out for people who pick up these books and they're looking in the front and they list all the books in the series. And there's one in the front called Mew, M-U-E, because for mutant, and it's a basic variation on humans. They're not aliens. They're people that have been engineered to deal with heavy gravity or high radiation planets or whatever. And so that was my working title, and my editor didn't like it, so we changed it. So there was another book that came out with a different title, which was essentially the book that I was going to write. So I get asked that now and again. Well, where's this book? I can't find it. Well, because it doesn't exist. We changed titles.
That's funny because you mentioned that, and I had never, and I don't even know what book it shows up in, but yeah, I remember seeing that. I'm like, what is that? Okay, well, that's interesting, but it never clued in. I figured I'd run into it eventually, but
no, you won't.
Yeah,
that's essentially Bork's book. Bork is the muscle guy. He's the big, strong champion weightlifter guy who is one of the Matadors. And that's his book.
Yeah, the Black Steel. Yeah.
No, Black Steel is Sleel's book.
Oh, that's Sleel's book.
Brother Death, Bork's book.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's been so long. Like I'll return to I'll read 97 Steps, and I'll read Man Who Never Missed, because those are probably my favorite out of all of them. So it's been a while since I've read basically the other three. So, but yeah. Star Wars. You wrote a Star Wars book. Actually, you've written now. I don't with Disney and them taking some of the stuff and making it legend and then making new stuff. So the new stuff that you wrote with another author,
Michael Reeves.
Is that considered legends, or is that?
Oh, it's tricky because Disney keeps taking bits and pieces out and using those, and then it makes it canon again. Yeah. So for those people who don't know, George Lucas sold the whole parcel to Disney for $4 billion and change, and Disney went in and took some of the books and said, okay, these are not part of the canon, which are the official, timelines, which essentially basically boils down to the movies. If it's in the movies, it's canon. If it's not in the movies or on television, and it's legends. It's sort of like, well, here's a story, and we don't know if this really happened or not, but this is the setup, and then they can restart it someplace else, and so yeah, Shadows of the Empire was yeah, that was going to be a Legends. Well, it was just a book when I wrote it, and then at some point it got sort of relegated to Legends. But then they were using pieces of it in the movie, so it's technically canon because there are pieces in the remake of Episode 4 where you see a ship, and that ship comes from Shadows, or there's a character and they come from Shadows. The martial arts they created for Disney was called Teras Kasi, and that literally means, I think that's Finnish, steel hands. And so I had a couple of practitioners, women, sisters, twin sisters, actually not clones, but identical twins. One had one blue eye and green, the other had two. So they came up with, they were Teras Kasi practitioners. Well, that's shown up in the movies and in games and stuff since then. In Solo, well, there's a throwaway line where someone's saying, "Oh, wow, where'd you learn to do that?" Oh, that's Teras Kasi. I'm back. So some of these books are canon, some of them are legends, and some of them will go back and forth as Disney decides whether they're going to do this piece or that piece. That's up to them, and I don't really care. It doesn't really matter to me because they sell well. If they do a movie and it's based even remotely on one of the books that I wrote, that'll be good because people will go out and buy the book. That's what always happens when you write a series. I don't know if you've ever, there was a terrible HBO series a few back called True Blood, vampires, and it was terrible because it's basically vampire porn. But the woman who wrote the books upon which it was based, and they weren't really like that in the books, had, I think, 8 paperback books out. And the week after that series premiered on HBO, all of them made the New York Times bestseller list. So she was jumping up and down because she didn't have to do anything. All those books came back into print, and she's getting royalties, and they've all earned out, and she's making pretty good money. And so it's like, wow, that's a nice trip. So when George R.R. Martin's series of Fire and Ice, another HBO series which you may have heard of, dragons and things in it. When they came out, he'd gotten pretty good advance for the books, and he originally planned to write 3, which is now up to 7, and he's not done yet. Game of Thrones was, when it hit the airways, all of a sudden those books just went right to the ceiling. So George is richer than Midas. He has a house, and then he has another house next door, and the house next door, it's got all of his stuff in it, his toys. He has a full-size working replica of Robbie the robot inside the door, and someone said, "Jesus, that must have been expensive." He said, "Yeah, what do you want me to do? Just pile up my money inside the door so people could see it when they walked in?" Yeah, I'm not at that level, but it's always fun to hear those stories.
Yeah. When it comes to well, are there any other Star Wars stories that, have you been approached by Disney or your agent to write more Star Wars?
No, they pretty much brought in their own raft of writers. I had parts in, I think, 4 novels, and reason I wrote 3, which were basically sort of Clone War novels, and it's our version of MASH, the Medical Armored Surgical Hospitals, and it's those were kind of fun to do. And then I wrote Shadows of the Empire, and then he and I wrote Death Star, which was essentially what happened on the Death Star before it got blown up. And not to spoil anything for anybody, but it's so. And then we wrote a couple of short stories and pieces that were sort of involved with that. And then I wrote a series of 5 graphic novels for Dark Horse, based on one of the characters who was one of the main characters in Shadows. But past that, you sort of fall in and out of favor, and at one point, it's a whole political thing that I won't really get too much into. But at some point, the science fiction and fantasy writers of America decided that Lucas wasn't paying enough money to its writers for the Star Wars books, because they were talking about paying a flat fee and no royalties. And So they got into a pissing match with George Lucas, which is not really the smartest thing to do. And so pretty much all of us who were writing at the time were kind of held up to the light and saying, well, we're not sure that you should be writing these because, your organization over here is saying that you want more money. I didn't say that. I never said any of that stuff, but we were all sort of tarred with the same brush. And so that I was welcomed back into the fold. They actually did offer me a job at one point. Reeves and I pitched a story about the entertainment industry, the dark side of the entertainment industry in Star Wars, and so was singers and actors and that kind of thing. And we thought it would kind of be fun to see backstage, and they liked the idea, but they wanted to do some serious changes. They wanted us to use a bunch of characters from the original series, and we didn't want to do that, so we declined. And then later on, they came back and said, we really still like this idea. Would you be interested in maybe trying it again? And nothing had changed as far as I was concerned. So I said, well, not really. I mean, I had an idea for a story, but you want to make it something else, and that's your toy. So you get to play with it how you want. But no, thank you. So Reeves at that point was not doing as well as he wanted to do. He said, well, could I write it? I said, sure. So he wrote the story with someone else. But we had been invited back, and then the next day I got a call from my editor saying, well, would you be interested in doing an Indiana Jones novel? And I said, yeah, sure. So I wrote one of those too. It's basically Indiana Jones and zombies. And it was called Indiana Jones and the Army of the Dead. And I had both kinds of zombies in that one. We had magical zombies, and then we had chemical zombies.
Yeah, actually, I'll be honest. That's another one of those books that I bought, but I haven't read yet.
Well, here's the thing with Indiana Jones, and I'm gonna got too far off course here, but Indiana Jones is the reason he works as well as he does is he's tough. He doesn't know any martial arts,
right?
But he's a tough guy, and he's getting kind of long in the tooth because the character Indiana Jones was born in 1897, I think. So by the time you get to now, he's really up there. He's getting really long in the tooth, and to be in his 70s, it's only going to take him up to the 1960s.
Right.
So as they do that, and as he and the actor Harrison Ford are both getting older, some of this action stuff doesn't play quite as well. I mean, you really don't think a 75-year-old guy is going to be running around there swinging on the whip and doing all this stuff. So my idea for that was, well, you should let somebody write this that's older, and let's go ahead and make a notion of the fact this guy is old. So let's put him in a Tai Chi class. Let's put him in a yoga class. Let's teach him how to fight smarter and not harder, because harder is no longer going to be there. He's not going to be as tough at 75 as he was at 40. So that was sort of my thought for how that should go. So I was putting some of that into the book that I wrote. But in this one takes place in World War II. Well, Indiana's always in his 40s. And in those days, the longevity, the lifespan of the average person was only 60-something. So he was past middle age. I had him out there laying on the ground, wishing he had an air mattress, one of those newfangled air mattresses to lie on. It's pretty much, I'm just getting too old for this. There was a lot of that going on. So, yeah, I don't know what they're doing. They're doing another Indiana Jones movie, and I'm not privy to the script. But if they don't acknowledge the fact that he's in his old age, they're going to miss a big bet, because kids already don't think that he can do this. And frankly, I don't think that he can do this either. And I'm pretty good shape for a man my age, but I'm not quite as old as he is. So the essence of this whole thing for me, I actually wrote 5 pages of a script that I posted on Facebook at one point, where I said, this is how I would write Indiana Jones. In this, he's taking a yoga class, he falls asleep. He's taking a Tai Chi class, he falls down. His granddaughter comes and knocks on the door while he's soaking in a hot bath, and he's, go away, kid. That's how I would do it, but it's not mine to do. It's just too bad, because that could be great fun to do.
Oh my gosh! See, Harrison, have it open up, and he's in a Tai Chi class, doing stretched out, and you have some lady just kind of talking. You just kind of see the boredom on his face of like, I can't believe I'm actually here.
Yeah. They put him in, in a yoga class. He's lying back in corpse pose, and then you can hear him snoring, and that's what you have to do. You have to bring in a young sidekick who does all the heavy work for him, or you have to have him learn how to fight smarter and not harder. And that's, of course, is my career as a martial artist. I started out at 18, and I was fit. I was working out 3-hour-and-a-half classes a day for 4 times a week, and jockeying out. And I could do all that stuff. When you hit 70, you're not quite as agile. You can still be in good shape. I know some old martial arts masters who can still kick your butt in their 80s, but they do it very carefully with great precision and with control and skill. And all things being equal, skill and muscle beat muscle every time. But if you're really good and you really know what you're doing, the young strong kid, that's the old joke. I mean, it's old and crafty beats young and strong.
So when it comes to, say, martial arts and reality, bringing kind of Rory Miller into this was another connection that you had been that connecting thread for me, because on your blog you had, and I don't remember your post originally about his first book, Meditations on Violence, but it was when his second book came out, and you had said, hey, I've known this guy. He's, we kind of disagree every now and then on things, but here's he's put his book out, his second book out. It's all right. Check it out if you want. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I think I'll check it out. So I went and got the first one. Cause I always like to start at the beginning, and I loved it so much. I got the second one, and then I kind of tracked him down, kind of almost stalkerish style, met him at a local seminar, and come to find out that he lives like a stone throw away from me.
Yeah.
So we became friends. How did you guys connect? How do you know him through?
Steve Barnes. Steve Barnes lives in L.A. now with his wife and son, but he was a longtime martial artist. He probably started training about the same time I did, and we knew each other as writers when we were in L.A. I met him there. I did live in LA, but I'd gone down there to write some stuff for TV and animation stuff. And so we bumped into each other, and it was a natural, martial artist, writer. I've read some of his books and I liked them. So he moved up here for a while to get out of LA after an earthquake. I think it destroyed his house. He and his wife moved up here, and he started training with the same teacher I was training with. He started there before I did, because he introduced me to it. So the Rory Miller thing was, we were talking. So he says, "Have you seen this guy Rory Miller's blog?" I said, "No, I don't know who he is." He says, "Oh, well, I had a chance to cross hands with him. This guy knows what he's doing. He's a cop." At the time, he was still working, I think, for the sheriff's department, and so I went and read his blog. I thought, well, that makes sense to me. I mean, of course, we don't always agree on everything, but he's the real deal. He knows what he's doing. He's been on the streets. He spent a time over in the Middle East, working as a contractor. Roy knows what he did. But the first time that we ever actually met, we had a little hand crossing session, and he's snuck up on me. And it's one of the tricks that he does in seminars, is that he gulls you into a certain level of complacency, and then he comes roaring in, and it's like, okay, it's a cheat, but you learn. You need to be better prepared when you think you know what you're doing. And right. I've seen him do it to other people that are high Dan level artists, and it just it's a sucker punch. And that, of course, the whole thing is the sucker punch ends a lot of fights. If you get the first shot in and it's hard, that's it, you're done. So anyway, we've gone back and forth off for the years, and we actually worked for a while teaching a class together online for writers. Roy doesn't read fiction. He he's not a big fan. He doesn't believe a lot of the stuff he reads,
Yeah.
so he'll read a sequence, a fight sequence or a cop sequence. Bull! It didn't happen that way. So we've had some fun with that. But he's a likable guy. I've always felt like, when I read his books, it's like I think I gave him a blurb for the first or second book that he did, and I said, this is good stuff. If you're a martial artist, you need to know the other aspects of other than just working out and doing the forms and the combat. You need to know the sequelae, what happens if you punch somebody out or you stab somebody. There's always going to be more to it than just, okay, we're all done, dusted now. There's a legal end. There's all these other things that go on. So yeah, I've always been impressed with Rory. He's a good guy.
Yeah, I had him on. I had him on here in its original format when it was, person to person in live, and I had mentioned that I had reached out to you early on about being on here, and he's like, "Oh, Steve, he's a great guy. You'll love to have him on there."
Mutual Admiration Society. He I don't think he posts on his blog the way that he does before. I think he's probably got a Patreon or something now. But there was some really good information there. He had some serious people dropping around to have these discussions. World class, bodyguards and fighters, and it was always something to be learned there.
Yeah. So, I had another question that I came up with. I can't remember what it was. It's always like that. So, okay. Your last trilogy that you wrote, Third Force, that it didn't have as much. Well, let's see. I can't remember if it had as much martial arts in it or not. That was actually one that I got the books, intended on reading them, but I actually got the audio books. So I've gone through the story.
Yeah.
My biggest complaint, the stories were great. I enjoyed the stories. The person who actually read them, though, I could not stand his voice.
Mm.
So I actually had to stop and start again. And I'm like, who chooses these people?
Yeah. Not me. No, the Audible people, the companies that do the recordings, you don't get consulted. What they will do a lot of times is they will send you a list of questions saying, how do you pronounce this word?
Okay.
Because a lot of times some of the words that we make up, or you look at them and they just don't think that, I'm not sure how that would be spoken. So we get those from different people. But yeah, I generally don't listen to the audibles because I'll listen to the first part of it to get an idea of how the flow is and how they're telling the story. And sometimes they have actors on there who really are good voice actors, and they can get it down. Sometimes maybe not, but the thing with those books is I wrote those because I really wanted to write more books about the Matadors, and Ace essentially said, we're not interested.
Yeah.
So I said, so what can I pitch you? So I'll pitch you something new. So I pitched the Cutters Wars because it had a military bent. There's a fair amount of science fiction, martial arts in there. A couple of the characters, one of the female characters is really adept, but they're augmented people. They have abilities far beyond those of mortal men. They are faster, stronger, smarter. Can jump higher, all that stuff, and it's done with hormones and chemicals and electronics and whatever I forget that I put in there, but there's a bunch of stuff. But my main martial arts character was an alien who was come from a really nasty planet, and she basically kind of looks like a giant praying mantis, kind of a humanoid praying mantis, and she's fast. And she's deadly, and those that leave the planet get jobs working as soldiers or bodyguards because that's what they do, and they're really good at it. So I had a lot of fun with her. She was, I think, one of the main characters in all the books, but in the center book, it was stuff wrapped around her, and so it was different. It was something that I wanted to do to to keep my face in the market and do these books and I think for what they were, that they worked out pretty well. But it was uh, kind of like, well, I'd like to do more Matador books, but they're not going to let me, so I'll do these, and they're okay. And I think you'll get your money's worth, and the story's all right, and they're the plots and work the way that they work, but it was just a different set of characters.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I remember when you first started working on them, and you had put out a little thing. Hey, for the first couple of people, I'm going to send out a small treatment. And I actually was one of those people that got to read the first beginning, and I actually really enjoyed them. All right, and that character, I can't remember her name, but but I somebody had drawn up what you'd be like. This is what I think that this character is going to
yeah,
look like, and
yeah.
somebody had uh, drawn it up for you. And it's an interesting character,
Well,
and just
yeah,
wickedly, just like, oh yeah, that's just how we do things,
yeah. Wicked, fast, and deadly. You just see
Yeah,
them look at you, and I had to go back and lay in a whole code of honor and how they did all that stuff and why they did what they did, and that was kind of a fun exploration for me. Anytime you come up with something it's new to you, and you get to kind of go in and play with what they do. So I had duels on the planet, and essentially it was kind of like 17th century Earth, where people would challenge each other to duels all the time. You have professional duelists. There's a great scene in Rob Roy where the main character is fighting a sort of foppish character. In fact, they actually call him a fop at one point, who's really a good swordsman, and there's no way that Rob Roy can beat him. And the way that I'm not going to tell you anything about
yeah,
that if you haven't seen it, but it's a great fight sequence. It's a great sword fight sequence. It's so those little bits and pieces kind of come into your mind. Okay, what would you do if you had a really good swordsman against somebody who wasn't so good? How did they win? I don't know if you've read anything by Stephen Hunter. Stephen Hunter has written a whole bunch of books about a guy who was a Vietnam sniper who came back to Earth to America, and kind of gave up sniping and they've done a movie about it. They've done these books have been around for a long time. The guys they call him Bob the Nailer, and Bob, that's what he was called when he was in Vietnam, and he was shooter, so he comes back, and there's a great martial arts sequence in one of them where it's called I think it's called a 47 Ronin. One of those, that kind of takes guys off on that, where he has to go face against a master Japanese swordsman. And the guy is like 68 years old, and he's got a hip replacement, and he has no skills with the sword at all, and so he learns just enough to die well, essentially. And he has to go face this. It's the Tea Master story. He has to go face this guy, and it's one of the most fun things I have ever read, because there are always these stories of the perfect student.
mhm,
The student who comes into the dojo or comes into the dojang or whatever, where does he, and he knows nothing, and within a couple of months he can beat everybody in there, including the teacher, including all the other students, including any challenger who comes by. And that's one of those martial arts myths that people have been working out martial arts for 25 years, and they see a guy coming in 2 months, he's better than everybody. And they go, yeah, sure. Yeah,
yeah,
we know how that works. It's the perfect student. And
yeah,
all the writers I know who deal with this stuff, and a lot of writers I don't know deal with it, they will pop this one up. Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai. Now, I liked the movie. I thought it was great. I had a lot of fun watching it.
yeah,
But I didn't believe that he could come into the local village and beat the local village teacher within a matter of a couple of months. Um, just because, and yeah, he was in that movie. If you haven't seen it,
I
he
have.
plays a Western, a cavalryman who was a hero, war hero, but he was a drunk, and he gets hired by the Japanese to come in and show them how to use modern warfare, and gets captured by the other side, and over the course of a couple of months goes from being a drunk to being master samurai, and so. They made an attempt to explain it, and I thought they did okay with it, in that, okay, he already was a warrior, already knew how to use a saber. He
Right.
killed people in battle. So That's the attitude, and as every martial artist knows, the fight's not under the glove; it's under the hat. That that attitude will get you through times of no skill better than skill will get you through times of no attitude. And so, they try and explain that, but yeah, the perfect student. And so, the Hunter book, the Stephen Hunter book, it's there is a sequence in there, and if you're a martial artist, you will love it. You will go, oh damn, that's so good. You should check that out. It's called I think it's called the 47 Ronin, or the 47 Samurai, something like that. But it's the guy's name is Stephen Stephen Hunter. He's a gun guy. Uh, he was a reporter for the Boston Globe or something for years and years, and he started writing these books. And so if you're a gun guy, you'll enjoy it because he gets all the gun stuff right, and he just sort of steers away from martial arts most of the time. But this one sequence is just like, oh, this is just so cool. I wish I had thought of it.
Now, back in the day, there was a can't remember his name off the top of my head. Mark Kilbane, I think.
Yeah.
So he had gotten the rights to Man Who Never Missed for movies or a movie and video game and all that kind of stuff. And of course, it never panned out because we never saw it on the big screen.
Yeah.
So those rights have kind of come back to you, I assume.
Okay. Yeah. At the moment, they're mine. They're always mine. The what you do when you're selling movie rights is you're renting out an option to make a movie. So it's like, for 6 months or a year, depending on the time, you get paid a set amount to give them the right to try and make it into a movie. If they sell it, if they find a producer that has money and they can produce this movie, then you get a lot more money. You get a piece of the action, whatever it is. If they can't, at the end of that time period, the rights revert back to you, and you can sell them again. So I think I've sold the rights to The Man Who Never Missed a dozen times over the years.
Oh yeah,
you rent them out. It's like a lease, and so and some of the people who were interested in it were interesting. I mean, early on, I know some of the people through Hollywood because I've gone down there a few times, and through connections with Dark Horse and Lucasfilm and people like that. At one point, Brandon Lee wanted to do the movie. Bruce Lee's son, and he said, "Since I get finished with this movie, let's talk." And so the movie was The Crow. Yeah, that's what I thought. He was a fan. I said, no, that's terrible. I mean, it was terrible, but that's
right.
just things that I don't know if anything would have happened. But he was an actor, but he might have been able to get a movie made. So. Yeah, I've had people that are in Hollywood. They blow a lot of smoke up your sarong. There's a lot of wheeler dealers who are hustling all the time trying to get the rights to do something, and they will make lowball offers. And most of the time, you just turn those down. You just say nothing. Every once in a while, I'll get a martial artist, someone who really knows this stuff, who will say, "I could do this movie. I could make this. I could get this done." And Kilbane was an actor, and he had some pretty decent roles, and he was also a writer, and so I thought, we talked about it. We cut up a deal. He put some money up. We're not talking major amounts of money. This is an old book. It's been around for a long time.
Right.
But every so often, someone will come in and say, "Well, let's, if you give me the rights for $1, I'll get this movie made, and you'll all get rich." And I'm going, "Yeah, I've heard that story before." And that's not how it works. And so let's not talk about this. So the way you separate out the players from the people who are wannabes is you set a certain amount of money, and if they're willing to put that up, then they got to, you say, okay, you got a shot. You might get this done. People who write, best-selling novels that make a lot of money usually get big offers to go to the movie. They're the people who need at least. I thought, I'm going to give you $100,000 to give me the rights to do this. And that's a serious player. That somebody wants to get his money back. So you can talk to those people. Say, well, I don't have any money, but I can just see. Look at all these actors, and they're basically bootstrapping. And so for the most part, when I get one of those, I just say, well, nice talking to you, thanks. I'll send them to my agent, and she'll work out a deal. And if there's any money involved, and that separates you from those people who would just love to make a movie but don't have any idea really how to do it.
Oh yeah, and that's totally me. I could see this on screen. I wouldn't know how, I mean, I wouldn't know how to put it together. Even though, I do little stuff. I do instructional videos, but I don't like, big.
It's not that it's not that's not the hard part. The hard
Yeah.
part is the money.
Yeah.
I know lots of people who have the skill. I mean, I could write a script for it tomorrow that I think would play, and I know a lot of people who could write a great script. They could get the right actors. You could get all the people together for a relatively low budget movie and still have everything you need and have it not completely suck. You have to produce the money to get it made and to distribute it. I've seen a couple of martial arts movies. I saw one recently. I don't know if you haven't seen it. It's called Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh, I want to see it because I want to see how bad it is.
It's as bad as you've heard. And even Tony Jaa can't save it, and he's in it, and he's a great martial arts guy on screen. Nicolas Cage is in it, and it's just one of those things where someone said, "We'll give you money to be in this movie." And he said, "Oh, okay, fine." So he phoned in his performance as Crazy Man, and you don't see him for the first 30, 40 minutes movie. It is awful. Bad writing, bad directing, bad acting. It doesn't look too bad in terms of the settings, where the location stuff. Bad special effects. Oh, it's just there's nothing about it that works.
Mm-hmm.
It is just it's so awful. It's like the Rocky Horror Picture Show awful. I mean, it's like, oh, I can't believe I'm watching this. Why am I still watching this? This is an hour and a half of my life I'm never going to get back. I know people that like it. They think this is great. No, it's not great. It's a testament to awful movie making and awful acting and it's just there's nothing about it that works. And yet it got made, and it probably made money because it was on Netflix. So you just never know. There's some pretty good movies out there that don't make a lot of money, but they get made. There's some awful movies out there that get made and make money. So yeah, it's just if the right person showed up with a fistful of cash to put one of these things, I think it'd make a great movie.
Well, as a fan, it frustrates me that there's all of these really bad remakes out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yet this would make a fantastic movie.
Oh, I think it'd make a great. Well, of course, I'm biased now,
Well,
but
yeah, I mean,
great action.
But as a fan, I get frustrated. It's like, God, why? This would make a great action film, and it, even with B-listed actors, it would still make because it's a great story. But it's just one of those things, right? And I can only imagine how you feel. Like, you watch like Jiu-Jitsu, you're like, oh my gosh, this is like my stuff would be so much better.
I had someone contact me after Firefly came out. He said, "Does this guy steal stuff from you?" I said, "No, it's an action series," and I thought it was great. I enjoyed watching it. I enjoyed watching the movie that they did, Serenity. It was fun. Everybody steals from everybody all the time. There's bits and pieces of the whole idea. If I've seen further than anybody else because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. This goes on in the movie business all the time. You swipe from the best. If you're going to steal from the best, and then something will pop up and you'll go, wow, I know where that's from. But it just depends on what you do with it. And for me, as a writer and a martial artist, I watch martial arts movies sometimes with what I would call a really hypercritical eye. Not for the martial arts, because I like Warfu. I think it can be really well done. I mean, pick any of those pictures, Jackie Chan movies. I mean, they're great fun. You don't expect too much from Yip Man or Jackie Chan, and they're a lot of fun. And then there's Iron Fist, and I don't know if anybody saw that. In outside of the people that watch Netflix, Iron Fist was awful.
Yeah,
they hired a guy who couldn't walk down the hall without bumping into both walls on his way, and it's like, if you're gonna do a movie about the greatest kung fu artist in the world, you need to hire somebody who can dance, who can at least fake it. I mean, it's just, it's like, really? no, this guy's not the best martial artist in the world. He's not even the best martial artist on the show. He's not even, he knows nothing about martial. They trained him for like 2 weeks, and and so I was jumping up and down, and people going, "Well, I thought it was pretty good." Well, it's because you don't know anything about movie making, about dialogue, about story, and about martial arts. And if you're going to have a guy who's supposed to be the greatest martial artist in the world, you need something.
Right.
You got to have something to show people. I mean, it's movie foo, and Keanu Reeves does great in his movies because he's learned how to fake stuff pretty well. He actually learned enough. When you see him playing with a gun, John Wick, and doing those martial arts moves, he sells it. I mean, you could be critical, but nonetheless, it's entertaining. They've hired an actor that knows how to do this stuff, and he trains long enough so that he can do those moves, and you can be critical of it on a real fine martial arts level. But then almost all movie martial arts are, what is the word we want?
Well, there's a level of disbelief.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can give people a certain amount of slack. Okay, he's it's like 400-year-old swordsman, dueling because it can only be one. And so Highlander, the idea for the Highlander TV series was, I had fun watching, but some of the stuff they did was, oh, come on, how stupid do you have to be to think, if you've been practicing this for 400 years, you need to be better at it than you are demonstrating on this TV show, or they need to overcrank the camera so you can move quicker and look better at it. And yeah, so if you know something about anything and you see it done badly, it grates. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not so critical of Run Shaw movies because they're just supposed to be what they are. But you have good stunts, you have guys that actually know how to do some kind of martial arts, and so you can say, okay, right, that's a good move. I mean, I think Ben Affleck was in a movie called The Accountant.
Yes.
In which he plays somebody on the autistic spectrum, and he's a hired killer, and he does slot in the movie, and you can see that's what it is. That's like, there's a sequence with him dealing with a guy, and he uses his belt, and it's like, oh yeah, that's that comes right from the sarong, the stuff where you're dealing with the guy. You can get it right. You can do just enough of it to convince people. That's what he's doing. I got that. I can see that. If they do it and they get it completely wrong, it's like, man, I'm sorry. How hard is it to hire somebody who knows how to do this stuff to stage the scenes?
Right. Well, it's funny that you mentioned The Accountant, because I was in Indiana a few weeks ago at a martial arts seminar, and we had Fred Masterson. I don't know if you know that name. He's a firearms instructor. First time I'd actually ever met him or taken a class with him. Just an awesome instructor. Really nice guy. But that was actually one of the movies. We were just talking about movies and the quality and the realism that they try to bring and yeah, the Accountant. And I'm not even a big Ben Affleck fan. Don't even get me started on the whole Batman thing. But but it was like, there's those movies where it's like, no matter how much you like the actor or don't like the actor, like, he was really good in that movie. And and the realism, the martial arts, the way they did the firearms stuff. I mean, it was all like, really legit.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I have to one more. I have to make my pitch for the best Batman, and the best Batman series was Batman the Animated Series on television. The best Batman movie was Mask of the Phantasm, which was the animated movie they did from that. Not just because I wrote a bunch of them, but because I got to do stuff in there that the questions you always ask: where did Batman learn to fight? You don't see that really covered in the comics or the movies.
Right.
When you do eventually, you see Ra's al Ghul. So but it takes that long to get there. I got to take Batman to Japan and go back in time where he's learning how to fight from a karate master, and the death touch and all these little things that I got to fool with. They wouldn't let us use the term death touch on animation.
Right.
because that's not appropriate for children to be watching those kind of things. So we had to come up with the touch of doom, I think is what we called it, and they let us use that. We had a sequence on one of them where he fights a ninja and there's a shuriken that gets thrown, and nobody gets hit. It sticks in a wall or something, and there's a close up. They wouldn't let us show that episode in England because that particular weapon is not something they want kids to be looking at, so it was censored. So
Hmm.
so when you get to go in and take an iconic character and say, okay, where did Conan get his muscles? I can tell you. Where did Batman learn how to do his martial arts? I can tell you that too. Um, those are fun. You get to go in and most of the writing that I've done in action adventure stuff has always got a martial arts component because I was doing that long before I became a writer. Um, and some of it's movie foo. I mean, obviously you really do that. I mean, Star Wars. I mean, it's all a samurai movie. I mean, if you can go back and look at the source material, the Hidden Fortress with the characters in there, and Lucas, that's what he was looking at when he wrote this movie, when he had this
Right.
all. So yeah, so that's always been part of it for me. I mean, it's great fun for me to go through and kind of and fiddle with that stuff. Well, where did they learn to do that? Well, that's a question you should ask. Where did that come from? And
Yeah.
I can tell you. So
And it's funny, I can actually, when I can picture the episode where he goes, where Bruce Wayne goes to Japan, or you take him back in time and
yeah,
learns that, because of course I watched that, not knowing, like, I didn't know that you had been, I think, I mean, not knowing at the time that you had written that. I don't even think I realized that you were a writer on there or had done a couple of the episodes for years.
yeah,
But yeah, Mask the Phantasm, I think, is probably one of the best
yeah.
Batmans. I actually saw that opening day I was visiting my grandparents. They had, I don't know, whatever wedding anniversary they were having, but the whole family gathered in Phoenix, Arizona. None of us lived in Phoenix, but for some reason we went there, and it was Christmas Day, and my everyone's like, "Oh, let's go to the movies." I'm thinking, who goes to the movies on Christmas Day? That was an alien, and so they're like, well, we're gonna watch this. I'm like, I want to watch Batman. Like, I want, like, if I get a choice. So I was there in the theater by myself with like maybe two other people on Christmas Day watching Batman, going, this is an amazing show.
Well,
So
the reason that worked is that everybody involved with the show loved it. They loved Batman. They revered the character. The writers, the illustrators, the actors, everybody that they connected to this thing really enjoyed being there, and it shows. If you're having a good time when you do these things, it really shows. If you have not much appreciation or even contempt for the characters, that comes across too. And so if you do a show or you write a book or you write something where you really aren't into it, but you're just earning your money, it doesn't resonate the same way as like these people were having a fine old time when they did this Batman series. They were all fans. They were all fanboys. Um, they had the artists had cartoons and things stuck up all over the studio. I mean the offices where they were working. Um, all kinds of stuff you couldn't show on television because there were cartoons and there was what they call BS&P, boards of standard practices. That's the censors in television wouldn't allow them to use this term and say this. So it became a big game as what we could get past. What can
right,
we sneak past these guys that they won't catch? And so all the writers and story editors would do that. They would put these little bits in and see what they could sneak. And writers do that. I mean, I have a couple of sequences in the Star Wars novel where I wanted to sneak something past the editor. And so what you do if you're trying to sneak something past an editor who's reading and looking for things like that is you hang a lantern on something else higher up the page. So you have a sequence where Chewbacca does something that's totally out of character, and you put that on the top of the page, and then 3 or 4 paragraphs down, you sneak in a little bit that you want to sneak in, and the editor's reading. He comes to the Chewbacca thing, he goes no, and he writes a note in the pen, and then he picks back up, and he's not really reading the few paragraphs because he's out of the story, and so he goes right on past that, and then the one that I got past, I called up the editor and said, I really like you. I don't want you to feel bad, so I'm going to give you a gift. He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Go to page whatever it was, 87, and go down 4 paragraphs and read that." And so he went, "Oh Lord!" And I had used an acronym for the subterranean histological interstellar transport engineers, whatever. And the first letter of each one was like, "Oh, you can't put that in a Star Wars book," but it had gotten past the editor. And
Yeah.
I don't know that a copy editor would have caught that because they would have been looking for it the same way.
Right.
I said, "Yeah, that's what you do. You play these little games where you say, oh, I'm going to sneak this in. And I did that in the Conan books. I wrote 5 Conan novels, and my editor for the Conan novels was a guy who had also written Conan novels and had his own series. And his name was Robert Jordan. That wasn't his real name, but he wrote a whole series of adventure books. Big fat fantasy, bigger than George Martin's books, that were 1,200, 1,500 pages. And he caught everything I was trying to sneak past, and he would say no. He would just write no in the margin, and there was just like page after page of no. You can't use the guy who's the werewolf in of this movie. I kept trying to sneak names past him, and that's what happens when you have a guy that's well read and catches all that stuff.
That's funny. I never read it. A buddy of mine who's a huge Aliens fan.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was in your first Alien, the first book that you did for Aliens, and I guess the character goes somewhere, and the person's, he starts using the name Kadaji,
Yeah.
the main character from Man Who Never Missed, and I guess somebody else is like, "Oh, well, where'd you get that name?" He goes, "I don't know, I read it in a book somewhere."
Yeah, you can self-referential. You can do those little bits and pieces. One of the Aliens books I had 3 soldiers, and they were basically Huey, Louie, and Dewey, the nephews of Donald Duck. But I changed the names. There was Heward and Lewis and Deward or whatever, and that's who they were, and everybody knew that's who they were, and they let that one get by. And I think I posted on this recently. It was funny because I had a line that I wanted to use in the Aliens book, and the line was eat hot plasma death, alien scum. So there's no way you can use a line like that unless you hang a lantern on it. You point out that you're doing this. So I had a character, and the alien's coming. He lets him have it. Eat hot plasma, death, alien scum. And the other character goes, "What?" I said, "I always wanted to say that." And he just go right on by. And so you can get away with it. And my editor for that series had that blown up to full size and put up on the wall over the desk, so that I'm gonna let that line pass because you did it. You did it well.
Yeah. Didn't you post that image a while back?
I think I probably
recently.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Okay. I remember seeing that. I was like, "Oh, okay, that's kind of funny." So
when it comes to the martial arts stuff, my editors don't usually question me. Gun stuff, martial arts stuff, they let that slide because they think I know more about it than they do, and they're usually right. Every once in a while, you'll get an editor who doesn't understand that and who screws up. There was a writer named Dutch Leonard who wrote tons and tons of books. Really, really, really. Elmore Leonard is his name, and westerns, detective novels. He's the guy that gave you Justified, the TV series Justified. That was his character, and he had a sequence in a book, which they made a movie out of, and the main character has a 38 auto pistol, 38 caliber auto pistol. So, well, they don't make 38 caliber auto pistols anymore. They haven't for a long time. What he probably meant was 380. So I wrote him a letter. I said, 38 auto is not a current gun. I mean, there's a target pistol that's a 38 Smith & Wesson wad cutter that's specialized, and they don't make that one anymore. And then they made them in the 30s and 40s, but they don't. And so I just wanted to point that out. He writes back and says, "Yeah, I know. I had written 380." And my editor, because that's what it was, is 380. My editor thought I had screwed up 38, so they took the 0 off the end.
Oh no!
So when the next book comes out, you'll see when they do the reprint, you'll see that it's been changed back. Oh yeah, it's bad enough when they catch stuff that you get wrong, but it's worse when you catch stuff you did right and then fix it for you, and it's not. I don't know what that editor's doing now, but I'm guessing that Dutch Leonard wasn't too happy with him.
That's funny.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. Well, if it's a mistake with the book, probably the editor did it.
Well, it's funny. A friend of mine, his wife's an editor, and she does like he'll tell me he says that she'll get stuff that he says she ends up writing the whole book because
Mhm.
it's the writer's so bad. And I was like, well, then she's probably working for the wrong writer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting relationship with a good editor. It's not adversarial. They say you made a mistake here, and you go, "Oh, right, thank you," because I don't want to look bad.
Yeah,
You caught something that I did wrong, and I need editors. I don't know any writer that doesn't need an editor. So they're going to catch stuff that you didn't see because you didn't. When you read what you wrote, you're not reading what's on the page. You read what's in your head, and so you're thinking, "That's what I meant when I said," and you'll skip over the same typo 5 times because you're literally not seeing it. You're seeing what you wrote inside your head. You're just going right past it. So a good editor can save you from yourself. Bad editors can make things worse, and I've dealt with bad editors, and it's not a fun experience. Um, Fortunately, most of the ones that I've had throughout most of my career have been good. I've had some that were so awful that I got into a yelling match with one locally who was running a local production company, where we were on the third floor of this office building, and I said, "Dude, I have written more books than you have ever read." And he goes, "Yeah, so." I would have thrown him out the window, except I thought he'd probably survive.
yeah. No, I just did. It's coming out on the 3rd of June. I put together a small little martial arts technique book because I figured out how to do the Vulcan neck pinch.
Oh
And
yeah.
so a friend of mine, Dan Anderson, he's has a school out in Gresham. He's done a bunch of books. And so I was like, please edit this for me. In fact, he actually encouraged me to start writing instruction books. So I was like, you encourage me, please edit this. So of course, I get, he sends me this email. It's like, okay, you missed this, what is this? Take this out, and so yeah, it was, and it ended up being, I'm really excited for it. I mean, it's a small little book, but it's one of those projects that it's just like, I've done it. I'm really excited about it. It's finished, so.
Oh, that's all good stuff. I have somewhere in my martial arts library a copy of a booklet on how to do the 1-inch punch that Bruce Lee used in demonstrations. And it's this thick, and it's a little tiny book because it's not that complex. But it's Roy Miller knows how to do that kind of stuff. Get Roy to talk to you about how he do that drop punch where you put your weight behind that hand, and so yeah, that kind of stuff's always good. It's always good to have that kind of material available so that you can, otherwise you wouldn't see it. And in today's world, because of electronics, you can actually publish stuff as an ebook that you probably wouldn't have been able to get published because the audience is so specialized for it. One of the last, most recent novels that I did was a book in which there was a lot of music, and it's just strictly an ebook. It's called Stem Winder, and it's about a guy who is a blues guitarist who can make the transition from Earth to the middle ground to fairy, and he goes back and forth between these worlds, and he's basically co-opted by the government to be a spy, and he gets involved in all this kind of stuff, and it has a lot of inside baseball music stuff in it because I play musical instruments, and so the guitar stuff and some ukulele stuff in there. And I knew that if I wrote this book the way that I did and sent it to New York, they'd make me take a lot of that stuff out because it's stuff you have to be a musician to get it. If you haven't ever played, it's not going to make sense to you.
Right.
So I didn't want to take it out. And so I just published it myself. And it's not going to sell that well compared to if it were a New York book. But that's not why I wrote it. And I wrote it because I wanted to tell that story. And if I had just started writing and never written anything before, I would listen to what people had to say about it. But since I've been doing this a while, it's like, okay, I'm not the greatest writer in the world, but I kind of have an idea what I'm doing at this point, and I'm telling the story I want to tell. And that's what you always ask yourself when you're a writer. Did I tell the story that I wanted to tell? Did I tell it well? Those are the only two questions that you really need to answer when you're writing. anything really.
Yeah.
And if I told the story I want to tell, that's half of it. The other stuff I won't know until it goes out there and people tell me whether or not I did it well. Did it make sense to you? Were you able to read it? Did it carry you along? But you can do your half of it. No, yeah. If you've written something and you had fun and it came out like you wanted it to, then that's it. That's the game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm using the Amazon, the Amazon publishing. So
yes. Yeah. Well, that's I do that, and the next Matador book will come out from it'll be an Amazon a book, a Kindle book. There's a couple other platforms that you can get into, Smashwords and 3 or 4 different platforms that you can get distribution. You can get into Apple Books and places like that. But pretty much, Amazon's a big dog, and the rate's better. You won't sell as many copies. That's just how it works, unless you happen to get into exactly the right niche and people find it. But it's a good place to get your book out where you might not have been able to get it out commercially because the people say, well, there's not enough people going to buy this. You're aiming at martial artists and particular kinds of martial artists, and so you're narrowing your possible audience down. If you're printing books and putting them in a warehouse and having to ship them, that's different than if they're electronic, and there's no cost to store this stuff, and you can just leave it in print forever. Whereas generally, if you do a paper book and send it out, it's going to spend 6 weeks on the shelf, and then that's it. You won't see it again. So.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a couple times, and I think even when you originally had posted on your blog that the next Matador novel is going to be an ebook.
Yeah.
Because you're is there any chance that you could actually have that second choice of having it paperback? Because I would love to have that second book sit next to this on the shelf.
I tried it for a while when I first started getting into ebooks. There was in 2007 there was a market crash, and we went into a recession, and a lot of the book houses pulled way back in, and I was having trouble marketing stuff. A lot of the mid-list writers, people that aren't top of the line, aren't bottom, a lot of the mid-list writers were losing their markets, and people were not buying books, and so I got into ebooks at that point, and I got into the idea of print on demand. Well, which was you go someplace like Lulu.com, and they would have the book and a picture of the book and everything, and if you wanted it, you clicked, and they would actually print the copy of the book up for you, and then mail it to you. And
right.
What I found very quickly was print on demand. It just didn't sell. If I put up an ebook for $5.95. However many I sold, I got 70% of the royalties. If I did a print on demand, royalty rate was much lower, and the cost of the book and the shipping was 3 or 4 times as much. So I did one my big alternate Indonesian fantasy novel. See if I can find a copy of that someplace. It's one of those things that. I don't even see one now. I've got so many books in here I can't track them all. But it was an 8.5 by 11, a big fat print on demand Indonesian fantasy novel, and then my collaborator Reason, I did one called The Chronicles of Alandia, and it was about a sort of steampunky world where technology wasn't very far, and somebody had a warship that used air cannons and steam. And it's called Dreadnought, and so we put that up as a print-on-demand book, and then as an ebook, and we sold. I forget how many copies of it as an ebook. It's still selling copies every so often. I think we sold 4 copies of it as a print-on-demand book because it was $22 for the book plus $5.95 or $6 shipping, and you had to wait 2 weeks for it. And then the ebook you click on, and it's in your Kindle or your iPad right now. And that happened a couple of times. Both of those books the same way. I could sell them as ebooks, but I wasn't selling them as print books. And people were saying, if you do this as a print book, I'll buy it. And then I could say to them when they sent me a note, you didn't buy it because I have a tracking record here, and I know how many copies were sold. There were 4 copies sold, and I bought 2 of them. And so, you know, you can't really snark that one. So I've had people say to me, well, if you do this as an ebook, we can have it printed for you. And I've had a couple of small press people that I've talked to. I've had a couple of guys say to me, and one of my artists friends says, I'd love to do the cover for it. And I said, well, I'm happy to have you do the cover, but it's probably going to be an ebook because there is no market. People say they'll buy it, but they don't. And so if a small press publisher comes in and says to me, you have the file, give us the file, we'll print the book up copies, we'll do all this stuff, we'll give you this much royalties. Okay, well, I'm willing to go with that, but I'm not going to do it myself because my experiences it doesn't pan out, it doesn't pencil. I like to have copies on my ego shelf too, of books that I've done, and a couple of the books that I did, ebooks, I had printed out and then I stuck up on the shelf just so I'd have them, but I hardly read print books anymore because I have an iPad that will hold 10,000 books, and I can light it up at night so my wife's sleeping over there and it's got a black background and white letters and I'm not disturbing her sleep, and I can read it and I can make the print bigger when my eyes aren't working the way else I want to. I've made that shift. I didn't think it would work that way. I thought, well, there's nothing that's going to beat a leather-bound edition of Shakespeare's comedies. It's this big and it's that thick and it's got onion skin paper and it's printed in 1898 and it's just absolutely gorgeous and it smells like a book. The first year we lived up here, we went to Powell's bookstore, which was huge. And people don't know this. Powell's is the biggest bookstore on the West Coast, maybe one of the biggest in the country.
Yeah, I love that place.
Yeah, and we spent all of our Christmas money in there buying presents for everybody, and then we kept half of them. It's like, no, I'm not giving this book away. Nobody will appreciate this as much as I. But at one point, I was doing a book review for my blog, and I went to go get the book, and I couldn't find it. I looked in everywhere. I must have lent it to somebody. I could, and I realized that it was an ebook that I had it in my iPad.
Oh.
And that's when I knew I had made the shift from paper to electronics. Is that I remembered the book, I remembered reading it, I remember what the cover looked like, but I didn't read it as a paperback book. I read it as an ebook. And so, it doesn't matter to me if the book, it's not the package. Now, there are people who collect books, and that's a different thing. And I still like books, and I still have racks of them all over the house, bookcases. But it's awfully convenient to be living here in the future.
Well, like I said earlier, I'm an Audible convert. I mean, almost everything. So like the Thrawn series, okay? When they let him, and the author's name is escaping me right now, but when they were like, okay, Thrawn's going to be part of the canon again, and they let him put out that first book, I was all excited, and I got the hardbound and I started reading it, and then I found out I didn't have enough time, so I downloaded the ebook. Yeah, I have all of them on ebook.
Yeah.
And I'm actually finishing I have like an hour and a half left of the last one that he put out. Timothy Zahn, that's who it is.
Yeah,
but it's like, so, I'm an Audible guy.
Yeah.
And
I know people that are dyslexic, they really just can't read.
Yeah.
And Audible books. There's no shame in that. I mean, it's kind of like, well, it's kind of a stretch to make that metaphor, but it's like kind of listening to the radio versus watching a movie. On the radio, it's all in your head. You're making it all up. You're listening to the voice and you're picturing the images, whereas you're watching it on screen, you have to look at whatever they produce. And so that's why so many people don't like movies made from books, because they go, that's not what the guy looks like to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm pretty careful about when I do a description to describe somebody in such a way that it looks like what I want it to look like. But I've had people come back to me and say, well, Kadashi and his beard. I said, Kadashi doesn't have a beard. Where did you get that? Well, it's in the book. No, it's not.
Yeah.
I didn't write that he had a beard. You put that in, and that's okay. I don't mind. You make him look like whatever you want him to look like, because all you have to go on are the words. And so we may not be, if I tell you about going into a restaurant, a Greasy Spoon in Texas in 1972, and the waitress comes out and she's got a blonde beehive hairdo and she's wearing a blue uniform and there's ink stains on the pocket where her pencil has come and gone. You know what that place looks like. I don't even tell you anything else about. I could just describe the waitress. John D. McDonald says there's a sequence he talks about describing the puddle of water on the floor underneath an air conditioner in a motel room, and it's kind of rusty colored, sort of shaped like the state of Texas. And the air conditioner makes this noise when it goes off and on, where it sounds like somebody dropping a bowling ball. And so, if just the air conditioner, you know what the rest of the room looks like, because you'll fill all that in. As a reader, you'll go, oh yeah, it's one of those ratty hotel rooms, and the bed's going to be greasy, and the towels are going to be you will fill all that in. And if you give enough detail about one thing, a good reader or a listener will go, oh yeah, I know the rest of this. And that's what happens with characters. That's why when you go to a movie and they show you this guy on screen, you go, that's not what he looks like. I don't know where you came up with this, but it's nothing like the guy that I had pictured. And I think as a reader, that's your job. Your half of it is to fill in your part. And so a lot of times when I was writing science fiction stuff, I didn't stop to explain things. I just said it and went on. And the idea is that I'm expecting you as a reader to do your part. If I tell you everything that you need to know in most minute detail, it's boring for me, and it doesn't show any respect for your ability to fill in those gaps yourself. I want my readers to be smart people. I want them to figure out what's going on. And if you can't keep up, go read something else. That's a terribly elitist attitude. But I like readers. I like writers that challenge me, that go with the notion that you're smart enough to figure out what's going on here. You would be here.
Right.
So.
Right. All right. Well, we've hit the hour and a half mark.
Okay.
This has been a great conversation. I know we've kind of jumped all over the place, but I really thank you for being on. Eventually, when you get that last Matador novel, whatever version it comes out in, tangible, electronic, I know I'll be reading it, because I absolutely love the universe. And one thing I didn't mention, so being a martial artist, being an instructor, I was a bouncer for a long time, and not a long time, but a long time in bouncer years. But I actually set up a training company to teach bouncers, get them, certify them, because in Oregon you have to be a certified in security to bounce, but also teaching them, proper, how to go hands-on properly, be safe, all that kind of stuff. I actually, the name of the training area was called Matador Academy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mainly because I couldn't get matadorvilla.com. That was already taken.
Somebody already used that.
So Matador Academy was available, so I was like, I'm going to go with that. And the emblem was actually a modified version of the flag that I actually had scanned it, like the little flag right there on the logo. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it was pretty funny. That's another way that you've influenced me. So
well, I'm happy to hear it. I'm always happy to hear that anything that I've written affects people to the point where they like it and use it.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, Steve, thank you for coming on the show. Not a lot of watchers today, but I get a lot of people watching after it's been live. Yeah. Thank you, Harvey, for asking a great question. And if you've hung out this long, and I don't have the little graphic up to show, but if you hung out this long and you still haven't liked, subscribed, shared, all those really neat social media things, do so now. Steve, I know you're on Facebook. You're very particular who you become friends with, but are you anywhere else on social media that people can follow you?
Oh, I think I'm on Twitter as the Man Who.
Okay.
And I didn't put in Never Miss, but the Man Who, I think, or Man Who Never. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't have a huge, I'm not on Instagram, and there's a couple of places that I checked into, places like Discord, but I'm not really, spending a lot of time on those places.
So do you still actively post on your, because I honestly, I haven't checked it in a while. I know it still exists, but your blog, Man Who Never Missed
Yeah,
on,
it is. I've reactivated it because I've gotten this unhappy with Facebook. They're all half of my friends are being kicked off or put in Facebook jail because they say something that is remotely irritating to the AI that runs their program now.
I have friends who are there too. So,
And so yeah, I've been posting more stuff on my blog over the last couple of weeks, and then just putting a link to it on Facebook. So you want to read this, go to the blog. If you don't want to read it, that's
yeah.
fine. That way I don't have to deal with Facebook censors coming in saying you can't use those terms.
Well, I'll put, after this goes live, I'll put those all in the description so people can link to that. But again, Steve, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And everyone stay safe, train hard.